I should distance myself, I should keep it relentless. My selfishness is what got me here, who the fuck I'm kidding?
And what do you plan to do if this whole dream of yours doesn't work out?
That doesn't even enter my consciousness.
There is a lot of tension over the course of Marty Supreme. About a dozen small objectives are presented to the audience and juggled by the characters, to the extent that there's really never an opportunity to rest. Marty has to make it to the World Championship and win. Then he loses and needs to go home without money. He's forced to hustle and dance between his pride and his dreams to make it to Japan for his revenge. He has to scam and lie and squeeze every person in his life for all that they're worth. He gets a woman that he impregnated shot, breaks the law several times, entertains an affair, and eventually makes it to Japan only to betray the person who got him there to defeat his one-sided rival in a show match. And it's emotional and cathartic. We spend the first 2.5 hours with this ambitious young man trying to make the world his. But after this match, he flies and goes home to see his child whom he missed the delivery for. And when he sees this child, he starts to cry. Why does he cry in the first place? It feels like a stupid question. That's his child. Of course he would cry. But over the course of this movie, he routinely pushes and demeans this child's mother, a woman who was already married to another man. He's incredibly dismissive and cruel to her, and it's genuinely hard to tell if the moments between them that are sincere actually are sincere. This unborn child is a side plot that is pushed and denied by Marty. Meanwhile, he does literally everything in his power to make the actual plot of getting to Japan to defeat his rival happen. But he has a significantly more emotional reaction to the child he rejected compared to the dream that he accomplished. So again, I ask, why does he cry? And what lie is this film trying to deceive you with? Before we answer those questions, we should understand the type of film that we're watching. This is more or less a type of cautionary tale. A story following an individual who's willing to trade everything for something, someone with a big dream, a high status, a life worth dying for. And there are a few hallmarks for a story like this. After all, you need things if you're going to be ambitious.
You gotta burn the boats and burn the bridges and commit all energy and focus to being the greatest bodybuilder on the entire planet.
And the first of those hallmarks is obsession. Now, stay focused. Remember, we want to learn why Marty cries, thematically, fundamentally. So, what do these types of story teach us about obsession? Magazine Dreams follows a young aspiring bodybuilder by the name of Killian Maddox, and Maddox is properly obsessed. His walls are filled with posters and pictures of everything that he wants in life. In his free time, he watches old Mr. Olympia competitions, writes letters to his idol in a very Eminem stand way, severely abuses steroids, and obliterates his body in the gym. Almost every decision Killian makes in the film is driven by an obsession with being the greatest. Killian doesn't just have dreams, he has dreams to be on the cover of magazines, and this goal gets explicit around the idea that these other films incorporate as well, and that's perception, and in particular, fear of bad perception. Bodybuilders are entirely judged not just by effort or anything emotionally intrinsic like hard work ethic or passion, but by genetic potential and outward-facing physique. And the desire to not fall below the standard set for them can create an intense amount of motivation from fear. A similar thing happens toward the beginning of Marty Supreme. He's obsessed with how the press sees him and how his desired peers see him. He draws distinctions between how he perceives himself and how he perceives the others in his life. He first denies the opportunity to tour with the Harlem Globetrotters because he thinks others will think less of him and his talent and they will be total gimmicks. And that's the first clue to figuring out why he cries. How does Marty's perception inform his emotional landscape? In a 2023 article about obsession, fear of failure and two types of perceptive fear are notated as having tremendous amount of sway in how someone engages with their goal. The first is endogenous fear of failure, and the second is exogenous fear of failure. The first relates to failure in regards to one's perceived sense of self, whereas the second relates to one's perception of how others perceive them. When Marty says, "People will treat me like a joke," it not only ignites the exogenous fear of failure, but will begin to also impact his sense of self. That reductive behavior and minimization of his skill will make him feel like a joke to himself. The second hallmark of a story like this is sacrifice. Obsession on that level requires a profound sacrifice to degrees that you might not even consider. For Killian in Magazine Dreams, the options are clear for us. You eat what's healthy, not what you inherently enjoy. You train when you could be having fun. You sleep when you could be playing a game. But in the case of Whiplash, the sacrifices are not as identifiable, but arguably more presented. It isn't spelled out in bold letters for the audience, but there is only one drummer in studio band. The character, Andrew Neiman, wants it, and he has to prove to his teacher, Terrence Flesher, that it's worth sacrificing all the other talent in the band for him to be the only one that gets to play. This is the most iconic conversation in the film, in which Andrew says,
"I'd rather die drunk, broke at 34 and have people at a dinner table talk about me than live to be rich and sober at 90 and nobody remember who I was."
While the scene highlights the intense ambition and obsession, it also implies a heavy sacrifice. He is willing to give up one life for another. Toward the end of the film, there's a scene where Andrew is backstage after being humiliated and his father is comforting him. His father has been built up to be this character who is happy and loves his son, but is also accepting of mediocrity and welcoming to compromise, whereas Fletcher, his teacher, is the opposite of that, demeaning and vindictive against everything below perfection. And in the movie's penultimate scene, Andrew lets go of his father, sacrificing that man's worldview, and returns back to the stage to meet Fletcher's expectations. And the scene is played as this massively inspirational moment, but in reality, Andrew has done nothing but consign himself to a world of sacrifice and isolation, and it's likely that he will end up dead and full of heroin at 24. Isolation is also another common thing within these movies. No one can quite keep pace or coexist with those who demand excellence. They, too, must be sacrificed. And everything must be able to be sacrificed. The pride that Marty holds onto at the beginning of this film eventually gets taken from him. He does go on tour with the Globetrotters and sells out in a dozen different ways throughout the film, falling back on stealing and scamming and humiliating himself, which puts more and more pressure on his unassured victory. If he doesn't win, then not only will his perception by others have been destroyed, but also his perception of self. These are also some clues we can use for the crying scene. What sacrifices are happening in his mind that inform both the perceptions he's experiencing and also the actual emotions that he feels? In order for one to, at the very least, maintain their own self-perception and worth, even if everything else must be abandoned, then it stands to reason that only one thing can be the priority for these people, which leads me to another one of the hallmarks of these films. Everything that these sacrifices are made for are for the fulfillment of the self. It's selfishness. This level of obsession, sacrifice, isolation, and maybe most importantly, self-preservation. The Social Network is a dramatized semi-documentary-ish film following Mark Zuckerberg and the development of Facebook. Throughout the film, Zuck's friendship with his buddy and partner Eduardo starts strong, but over the course of the movie and to more than one person, Mark starts to betray people, even going so far as to remove Eduardo's name from the company by diluting his shares from over 34% to less than 1% by making him sign a deceptive legal document. But what I think makes this level of selfishness interesting is how The Social Network bookends the film. Toward the beginning of the film, Mark is chatting with a girl he thinks is cute and fails to gain her approval and the social status that would come with it. But like we talked about earlier, this also begins to impact his sense of self and self-perception. And throughout the film, we see all of this insane obsession and ambition and sacrifice and selfishness. But once he's at the top, the movie ends with Mark logging onto Facebook and searching up that same girl that rejected him. And I think this speaks to something a little more fundamental than just loneliness or desiring the wrong thing, but more so the fact that in order to get to where he is now, there were certain ideas that he needed to let go of, his friendship with Eduardo being the big one, but even that merely being a symptom of the need to protect his sense of self through his grand ambition and obsession. Marty's selfishness is likewise seen all over this movie. When Marty and Tyler the Creator go hustling for cash, instead of splitting the money equally, Marty creates a fight to try to take all of it. Instead of prioritizing Rachel at any point in the movie, he demeans her and ends up getting her shot before leaving this wounded woman to deliver the baby all by herself. Instead of respecting his friend's time and home, he routinely takes advantage of him for his own good. But by far his most selfish relationship is the one with Kay and his affair with her. At the beginning of the movie, while Marty is still cosplaying greatness and posturing, he preemptively books the nicest room in this hotel and is flaunting himself in front of some journalists, and it's then that they're distracted by Kay. She is and was what Marty wants to be. His affair with her is purely to patch his own ego and justify his own sense of self by sleeping with a woman significantly more accomplished than he was while he's still performing success. It satisfies his own ego. Later on, when they meet again, he covertly steals what he believes to be Kay's jewelry, only to try sell it for money and learn that it's costume jewelry. He then returns to the woman, faux confessing that he stole it and intended to sell it for money, but his guilt wouldn't let him. I mean, this guy is a bastard. But ultimately, these are reflections of different degrees of fear that we've talked about thus far. This type of selfishness only comes from that level of obsession and sacrifice. So we can add this perspective to the crying scene and try to figure out, how is Marty's selfishness on display when he sees his own son? The thing that poisons all of these other traits beyond what is reasonable, and the final, most essential hallmark in a story like this, is ambition. Ambition is defined by a strong desire to achieve something, typically requiring determination and hard work, but it feels so much bigger than that. Any moderate dream one might pursue, especially one born in their youth, is like the first time you fall in love or the first time you experience true grief. It doesn't only feel like something you've never experienced before, but also something that is completely unprecedented in human history, as though you're not only charting waters that no one knew existed, but you're the first person to discover that there's an ocean at all. Ambition tells you that you can be the exception if only you're willing to be obsessed, if only you're willing to make the sacrifices, if only you can be a little selfish. And what's most interesting and tempting about this idea is it's not inherently wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting to make a name for yourself. There's nothing wrong in wanting to make enough money to retire early or travel or raise a family. There's nothing wrong in pursuing something you love. Ambition is less a trait and more an idea by which other traits are able to express themselves. A hustler, a liar, an obsessed person, a particularly passionate athlete or artist are all ambitious, but their ambitions are unto a vague goal. Everything else we've talked about are explicit steps. Marty cannot be a shoe salesman because it undermines his own ambition, and therefore he must become obsessed with table tennis to become good enough. That obsession leads to sacrifice, sacrifice to selfishness, selfishness to loneliness, and loneliness to victory. And what I find most interesting about these types of films, Whiplash, The Wolf of Wall Street, Marty Supreme, Black Swan, American Psycho, for God's sake, all get people who walk away inspired by these movies. And it's because these are such common traits associated with success or perfection or the American dream. And the tricky thing is, they are largely correct. That is the cost. If you do everything and climb and climb and climb, you can become a winner. But I think the lie is a bit more nuanced. People enter their quote Marty Supreme era ready and excited to chase their dreams, and in all honesty, most people will quit. But I think honestly that people that watch these movies and think that if their dreams are big enough, they will be the exception to the rule. Not in the way Andrew Neiman becomes the exception in the world of music, but in the sense that you won't be affected by the negative parts of these films. If you chased your dreams, really chased them, maybe you wouldn't be as lonely. Maybe you could afford to be less obsessed than they are. Maybe you can avoid being as selfish as you could be. But the reality is, you are not the exception to any of those things. Ask anyone who's tried to chase a relatively ambitious dream, and you'll hear about needing to skip hangouts with friends, missing family events, picking up extra hours, working when maybe you needed to rest. Again, not inherently bad things. It's 95% admirable, with 5% of poison ruining 100% of the idea. And that really does beg the question, what does all of this really cost? And what is it really worth? When you think about what Marty achieved in Japan, it's kind of nothing. He ruined his relationship with the man that got him there. He lost his opportunity to play in the World Championship. The only thing that he did was defeat his rival in a single set in a match that didn't matter beyond satisfying Marty's fragile, barely intact sense of self. All of that sacrifice and pain and effort results in really holding on to what he believed about himself, and even that is shattered. When Marty returns to the hospital, he's really achieved nothing. He's still broke. He isn't a world champion. By every metric he uses for himself, he is a failure. And before him is his son, a roadblock in his life, something that he's been rejecting this entire film. If his penultimate story beat, defeating his rival in Japan, barely elicited a tear, why does seeing this baby make him bawl? Keep in mind all of the clues and questions we've gathered over the course of this video, and I want you to fill in the answers based on my reading or your own reading, because this is a relatively contentious and debated ending, and I will not claim my analysis is 100% right in any way, shape, or form. But I believe that Marty is happy, and the fact that he is happy fills him with despair. This child is the physical embodiment of everything that Marty has been rejecting throughout the film. The ordinary sales job, the hometown childhood romance, the lack of uniqueness. This child is something ordinary in his eyes. Marty only chases the great, the future, to be a supreme version of himself, and that's where he sees all of the value in life. But if this, a newborn baby, is able to bring him true joy and happiness that he hadn't gotten from the thing he was actually ambitious for, then what was the point of all the obsession, sacrifice, selfishness, and ambition? The joy he has for this baby disrupts his perception of self. He isn't someone who cannot be content with an ordinary life because he is happy with something he previously rejected, and it makes me think that Marty is silently feeling a question at the very core of his soul. What's wrong with living a modest life? And I mean, really, why is it that there is a chase for something more when something more is right in front of him? At the beginning of this film, this baby is seen as a sperm cell with millions of others racing to fertilize its egg. In the same way, Marty is racing against so many people and himself to emerge at the top of this fledgling sport. And I think it's the movie's way of showing us how truly extraordinary something as ordinary as a newborn baby really is. Something that Marty arguably wasn't able to do in his professional career is something this child simply is. And I think that's an interesting question or idea to suggest in a movie about ambition. Is there anything wrong with just wanting to work enough to take care of a small group of people and hit the bar on the weekend? Social media tells you there is something wrong with a modest life. You need to be self-employed, retire everyone in your family, leave your mark on the world, grind, be obsessed, sacrifice everything, become so lonely and depraved that victory doesn't even bring joy. And once again, not that ambition is bad, but it cannot be everything. One of my favorite quotes of all time is by a philosopher named Diogenes, who was talking to Alexander the Great about his father, the king. The story goes, Diogenes is searching through a pile of bones and skeletons. Alexander the Great then asks the man, "What are you looking for?" To which Diogenes replies, quote, "I am searching for the bones of your father, but I cannot distinguish them from the bones of a slave." Friends, if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, or hyping, as this is a new channel and it will help out tremendously. Also, if you really enjoyed, please consider signing up for my newsletter in the pinned comment to read my submission for the Pro Rating Aid $50,000 contest. Anyway, goodbye, God bless, and keep dreaming.